Welcome, everybody. It is so good to have you as a real participants and also online, but having the audience real helps us a lot in terms of interaction. I see many familiar faces and new faces. And I know that Yano-san, who is the guru of happiness in the way of the data analysis, but also scientific way of understanding the happiness. So many people are experts and many are dealing with the changes in terms of well-being of themselves and sometimes their families, their society friends, and the employees of their organization. Because of the COVID, we knew that the rapid change, drastic change, really hit badly, particularly certain subsegments of the society. They are financially hit, of course, mentally hit. But in the hidden way, there are people who look very nice, but internally they have the deep problem and they have the difficulty in terms of going through COVID, but they can't express themselves. And we know, unfortunately, this pandemic is not the last one in our lifetime. It's very likely that in coming 10 to 20 years, maybe we are going to see the pandemic again. I don't know the impact and how big is it, but it's coming. We know, particularly those who are living in Japan, within 20 years, we are going to go through huge earthquake for 80% plus probability. We all know that. And we are seeing global leaders are talking about climate change in Glasgow, in UK. But in climate change, we are talking about, we try to limit up to 2 degrees centigrade increase in temperature. But in reality, 1.3 degrees have already increased. 65% of our target is already consumed since 19th century. So that means we are going to see more torrential rains, more strong wind, typhoons, many things would happen like that not, even when we are going to take actions against global warming, meaning that this is a time we have to think through how we can go through those difficulties in terms of well-being, mentally, physically, sometimes financially, for individual, but collectively as a society and organization. That's the things we would like to talk about today. And I would like your lively participation. Last 15 minutes or so, we are going to open up the floor for your questions. Please ask questions. This is going to be the dialogue. That's what we would like to do. And first of all, Vicky, thank you very much for coming. I know that the work you've been doing was kind of in Japanese, Inochi no Denwa. So the crisis line for the international community in Japan. What kind of things you have seen actually happen and you are seeing at this moment?
Thank you. So in the initial phase of the first, if you like, wave or lockdown or state of emergency that we had, there was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of anxiety around the world and again in Japan. We saw people going out and doing all that panic buying, and on our lifeline, we saw lots of people calling us with a lot of anxiety. They were very stressed. Many foreigners were worried about what would happen to their visa. They were hearing about whether they'd get home again, that heightened state of anxiety. The next phase that we heard from, maybe going into May, June, was the toll of that first wave, if you like, on relationships and on employment. So if you were looking after children at home, if you had your spouse also working from home, if 2 of you were trying to work from home, if you had a small apartment, how was that working? If you weren't in a good relationship beforehand, what was that like? So those stresses and pressures that were added onto relationships, never mind having to adjust to all of the changes that you were dealing with, was what was going on initially. Then when that second state of emergency happened after the summer, if you like, late summer going into the fall, the mood changed. it changed dramatically. We saw people no longer just being anxious, but they were becoming very depressed, and the suicide, every other caller that we were having on our line was very suicidal, and the volume of calls on our line just blew out of proportion. I imagine all the other Inocino Denwas were in a similar position. And since then, that state of depression, that feeling of hopelessness has been a constant on the line.
So anxiety and attitude, the relationship matters, but it's because of the prolonged situation, it's now coming to the depression, and it's still ongoing.
Correct.
I assume.
So, and in amongst that, it's going to be different for different groups of people.
Yes.
So if I'm a foreigner and my family lives in the United States, all of last year, there was a lot of turmoil that was going on, and you're getting a different message. For me, I'm Australian. I have family back in Australia, and I also have a daughter in New Zealand. Well, there's no way that I was getting home to see either of them because those countries had very strict lockdowns.
Yes,
If I lost a family member and I couldn't go home, how traumatic was that for me?
Yeah.
Right. So there were different things going on at different times for different groups of individuals.
Yeah, but I assume that this is the really once in a lifetime, at least for me, situation that many things are evolving, and that would adapt to the some of the mental health of individual because of the new things you need to go through, the new ways of living, and because of the new situation, which is in many people called in the business world VUCA, and uncertainty, anxiety, and blah blah blah. So everything is in VUCA situation right now.
Yes, but we know a little bit more than that.
Yes.
So from our research in 2011, we were very involved in rolling out psychological first aid, which is the way...
East Japan earthquake.
Yes. So we know which populations may be more vulnerable, and we know that when we're in a state of disaster, we are all experiencing what is called a traumatic stress response. So that's a heightened stress response, and we've all been experiencing that for the last 20 months.
Yeah.
Right? So we know that that's going to drain, if you like, our resilience levels, our resilience tanks. And those people that are more vulnerable or have got more stresses on them and more challenges are going to have their resilience tanks, if you like, drained more. So we know that, right?
So psychological reservoir, what you call resilience tank, the level of resilience differ so greatly by segment of the people, by past experience and the situation they are in.
Correct.
Yeah. So understanding that we need to be prepared how to deal with, I'm going to come back to you later, and what are the things we could do to intervene to improve that situation depending on the society, its sectors. So let me turn to Angus. I know that you are dealing with so many employees, 11,000 or something like that?
A little more than that, 75,000.
75,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, outside of Japan. Not many people know that the MUFG, Japan's biggest financial institution, has so many employees outside of Japan. But the situation in each country during the COVID differ greatly. And let's say the people's attitude, for example, to vaccine is different. So there is so much diversity in terms of situation they are feeling against how to deal with it. Have you seen any particular examples of in each part of the world, globe you are dealing with, typical, let's say, symptom or problems or issues you ever see outside of Japan among the employees you are dealing with?
Yes, well, thanks. So the MUFG, obviously you'll know, is headquartered in Japan, but has a number of outreaches over 50 countries. And the larger bases in Southeast Asia, and we've got some investments in partner banks in Southeast Asia, so that includes the Krunjis and the Danam and BDI Danam. So what we've been trying to do at the center is bring together a plan of some guidelines really for the whole of MUFG as an organization. So both new ways of working and also well-being, and what essentially is an employee value proposition. Well, what we've been able to do as part of this crisis is really an opportunity to look across the whole globe and see what are the commonalities. And I think there's some very clear ones about anxiety and concern, but also it's raised the importance of the employee in the mindset of the employer. And I know that sounds very basic, but mostly, particularly financial institutions, have focused on customer and client and
profit
and shareholder. Well, I was going to say shareholder value, but actually less so with the Japanese institutions. It's more customer, client, and then other stakeholders. Of course, the shareholder, but some of the other US banks and the British banks are more focused on shareholder value. But that's an aside. But I think what this has brought into play is the employee and the importance of it. And actually, it's obvious. So and in some areas, in some countries, they've already been the center of the organization, but certainly across the piece, it's about what matters to the employee. So simply put, we've been asking them.
Oh, how did you ask? It's a survey sort of?
Well, actually in Japan, in center and in Japan, every employee has an opportunity to answer every day a couple of questions from a survey on their screen.
Every day?
Every day. A simple question like, how are you feeling? Ed, did anything good happen to you today? It's just giving a sentiment. And actually that data is very useful, very carefully used, but very useful as a if you look over different areas of in different regions or different parts of the branch network, you can see that there's particular concerns and you're able to respond to that. And I think the idea is to then build a data portfolio, and we don't do that across the globe, but we do ask through survey simply, what does well-being mean to you? So it's allowed us to ask the question. And I think we're going to hear from Dr. Lai about perhaps some definitional pieces around that. What does it mean to you? What is the employer doing that's good or bad for that? And what could it do better? Simple. So we get some data through a pulse survey, fairly quick, and we're able to respond. Now, the important thing is we need to do things about it. If people have spoken, we need to react.
Yeah, so can you just interject? Interesting things in order for us to really understand. You are dealing with a diverse stakeholder, but the first point is understanding commonality, right? So before going to dealing with individually, this segment needs this one, this segment needs that. You need to figure out what are the commonality first. And then you are going to, in order to get the commonality and also specific needs, you really asked at a dialogue by way of online survey, but it's a dialogue basically. And it's a plethora of data, but with that data, you are deciding what needs to be communicated, what needs to be done. That's the process you took in way of maintaining the well-being.
Yes, I mean, it's only one set of data because not everybody's going to tell you what they think or feel. So the other thing, what has become very important, which again is obvious, is the line manager. So the person who is responsible for a group of people. Whereas before, particularly in Japan, people would come to the office and it would be line of sight and fairly obvious what to do. Now suddenly remote immediately. So therefore the line manager has to learn a new set of skills about achieving productivity, understanding the individual's mental state and what to do about it. So actually the line manager then is interposed into the individual's life in a different way.
Okay, so the commonality is kind of a values held kind of commonly throughout MUFG, but depending on that commonality, line managers supposed to act differently depending on situation, depending on the individual. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, essentially, we're going to what we call our culture principles, which are, you know, about the individual and their well-being and their productivity. We obviously are a commercial organization, but this has brought into play the individual worth and value where it meets the employer needs as a commercial organization. So that's actually a very interesting intersection of what is the role of the line manager to be productive for MUFG, but also now what is their role in facing the individual. And what we're doing is bringing up the values of the organization around the employee, centering them on the employee, but still trying to get the right balance between commercial and empowering and the well-being of the employee.
Very interesting. I would like to come back to you later on that. That's the things uniquely done maybe by MUFG, but what are the next steps? What are the issues left behind going forward? So I'm going to ask you to Dr. Lai Alden, and I know that you're an expert on understanding the difficulty of, let's say, defining, understanding, and putting the meaning to the well-being, depending on the culture, depending on the geography. Can you just talk about those diversity issues in terms of well-being's definition and the reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Angus. And, I think it's fascinating that MUFG is basically asking employees in terms of how do you define well-being, because this is something at the foundation. It's honestly, it has been a burning question for researchers for decades. So I think, first of all, we should understand the premise is that it's really, there's no one consensus around what exactly is well-being, but at the same time, we need to move forward, right? We need to have something. So I think currently the consensus is that there's a question that people use across the kind of like the world. They basically ask people, imagine yourself on a ladder of say, if the bottom rung of the ladder is like 0 and the top of the ladder is 10. So imagine there's a ladder in front of you. Where do you think you are right now on a scale of 1 to 10 on the ladder? So this is basically the classic, what we call the Kentro's ladder question. And then basically it's asked around the whole world. And this is how the World Happiness Report and the rankings come about, like Finland, Denmark are the happiest country in the world. It's ultimately really based on that. But now the problem with that kind of like measure is that when you think about, other cultures, so, the whole ladder metaphor, it's only upward, right? You don't want to be stagnant. You want to keep moving up. So, does it resonate with you, Mitachi-san?
Yeah. Yes, and obviously, and we know that some of the subsegments, like some set of Japanese, are hesitant to say that never 10. I should put 5 as an ideal. But for some of the people, I don't mention the name of the country because it's unbiased. It's like 10 is always the case. This is what we need to aim. So there are certain differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can certainly imagine the consequences of having that kind of measure and imposing that kind of measure across all the countries in the world, right? So, and I think that's a reason why we don't see a lot of changes year to year in terms of the World Happiness Rankings. So when you think about the cultural diversity that's needed to rethink, how we basically reconceptualize well-being. So we, the foundation, basically, we recognize that the ladder question is problematic. There are other metaphors. So just taking Japan, for example, and we've discussed this a lot, with Reverend Kawakami and kind of like colleagues and Yano-san as well, kind of like in a conference. It could be a pendulum, for example, because you could be thinking about life comes and goes. And it's true that, for some Japanese people, being at the top is really scary. It's kawaii for them, because if you're at the top, it means that maybe you're running out of luck, running out of fortune. You might just come down after that. And that's why there's some reluctance in terms of, well, I don't necessarily want to be at the 10. If I'm consistently at 7 or 8, that's good enough for me, right? So there's kind of like one aspect of it. The other piece I'll just mention very briefly is that usually people also pair the ladder question with emotions, but the emotions they're asking is like, do you feel very excited? Do you feel depressed? Do you feel worried? And if you think about it, these are kind of like extreme or what we call high arousal emotions. They are kind of, you're a very excited state, you're a very worried state. So at the foundation, we have been working with Gallup, for example, to kind of like ask questions that have a lot more Eastern kind of like cultural nuances to them in terms of, so for example, we asked a question to more than 120 countries in the world. How much do you experience calmness yesterday? Do you feel like the various aspects of your life are in balance or are they in harmony? So, the concepts around balance, harmony, calmness, tranquility. So these are concepts that, certainly people across the world experience them, but the problem is, again, we've been measuring them in a very particular way, and now it's time to expand those conceptualizations.
It's fascinating. It comes to my mind that the definition between social science versus humanities, for example, psychology, certain subset of psychology is really trying to be social science, so it needs to be data-based, needs to be theory-based, and then analyzed and proven by the data. And I think the data provided by MUFG could provide a huge amount of both quantitative and qualitative data, which is very important to become a social science. But for humanity, we know that the human being is something beyond the data itself. So we need that humanity is like arts and literature, things like that. We know even in some part of the psychology, and that cannot be numerically measured is very important. So we need to have those balanced view of data-based understanding the current situation and how to understand it and to try to come up with intervention measures which are meaningful to improve the measurement score, but at the same time, some nuances surrounding that. As you said, pendulum-based view, balance, holisticness, that's something could be missing easily by just numerically analysis. That's something I took away. Is something right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and I think one of the objectives of this session is to discuss resilience and well-being at the individual and kind of like the broader community governmental level. And I totally agree. I think we can apply the social science perspective to more like the government and community, because if you want governments and stakeholders and communities and businesses to come together, they need a framework. They need a common measure, they need a common language and jargon, but at the same time, at the individual level, you know, so for the audience's information, we were discussing kind of like backstage in terms of like, people feel like there's this mold of like perfect well-being image. And I don't feel like I'm currently at the mold and there's a gap, you know, what can I do about it? So my thinking is that at the individual level, we also need to define our well-being with our own terms. So yes, the government, you know, for egalitarian reasons, they have a common framework, but at the individual level. So for example, a question like, do you feel like the various aspects of your life are in balance? So we do not try to impose on you, you need to have 10 aspects of 5. You decide for yourself, you know, I have 2 aspects in my life that are really important, family and my job. So, you know, so I think we need to define with our own terms at the individual level. And, you know, so I really see this interplay between, we need to be authentic. We can take charge at our own level of defining what we think is important to us, but we also need our government and the stakeholders and communities to have a common framework so that we can kind of like meet somewhere. So
that actually resonates what Angus has, you know, explained us, that it's a combination, having the commonality, but at the same time, asking each line manager to have a direct interaction with individual. That's where that kind of a non-numerical measures that could be put in place depending on the situation. As Professor Lai, Dr. Lai mentioned, it's very important to ask individual to set their aspects, meaning that definition of well-being differ by individual. That aspect is very important. That's great. And let me turn to Daiko Matsuyama. Matsuyama-san, I know that you are lecturing in Stanford, meaning that you can logically explain what Zen is all about. And I know that you even did the remote lecture during the pandemic for students in Stanford to experience and understand what the Zen is all about. Are there any learning we could have from your experience of, let's say, logically explainable, data-driven understanding of well-being versus some more softer side of what's inside in us, which drives mental and physical well-being of the individual? Can you provide some insights on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And before my turns, I'd like to add some information about Angus-san. So actually, I am appointed as an online lecturer at MUFG from last year. And my online lecture is the most, popular program. And every time I have more than 500 participants. And I think, so they're, having a lot of questions, but not written on the books. But I can answer any questions they have. So I think this is very important. So as you said, the conversation and the personal questions. And
so anyway, it's a dialogue. The online lecture you are doing at the MUFG is not only the preaching from yourself, but it's a two-way dialogue to asking the question. And
yes, I give meditation 30 minutes and lecture 30 minutes, but the other 1 hour question and answer.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of questions.
Mm.
So anyway, I'm sorry, but
No. It's sorry to intervene, but I think one of the key takeaways from me, for me at least, is that how we can enable the two-way communication, meaning the interaction beyond one-way linear view of how we can set up the intervention measure to improve the well-being. Sorry to cut you off, but please continue.
So in my online lecture at Stanford, so before pandemic, I have a chance to go to Stanford every 2 years. And every time I go to the bookstore at Stanford, I can see the many books, piles of books in front of the cashier. So which says mindfulness, mindfulness, mindfulness. So I think it implies that they're suffering, right? So if they're not suffering, they do not have to read that kind of the books. So of course, so there are the problems and the questions which can be solved by logics and reading books and examining the data. But there's still something remaining which cannot be solved by these the means, like what is the value of the life or the meaning of the work. So what is a happiness and what is a well-beings? So these are the very personal things, and the learning from practice is very important, and they have to find out what these things means for them, for themselves. So in my online lectures, I combined, of course, logical thinking, or for example, reading books or debates, but also I highly cherish the practices, even online. So I had a shojinryori, so traditional vegan cuisine cooking class in my online lecture. So I think this kind of a mixture of the practice and the logical thinkings are very important.
So the mixture, practice or experience is very important. I remember learning from you that in explaining what is shojinryori is all about, you actually cook yourself and to show them you are not going to waste even the water you used to wash the rice is utilized in a different manner. So it's the total kind of practice of not wasting even the dirty water is something only can be understood by practice and doing. That's what, and I'm taking correctly about what.
Yeah, of course. So I think at the begins, how can I say, they're caring about what to eat, but in our traditions, we highly cherish how to enjoy the food and also how to prepare for the food. And I think, how can I say, so by so Zen is a kind of a very efficient religion, but now so everybody is taking care of only the efficiency of money or efficiency of time. But in Zen, we highly cherish efficiency of things. So in Japanese, we call it ikasu. So we try to take advantage of everything. So using the starch of the water after polishing the rice, or even the skin of the vegetables. So I think this is a concept of Zen, and a very important concept.
Yeah, I think that is something we would like to come up with very quickly later on about how we can make a better intervention to improve the status of well-being. But that philosophy, or the how you view the world in order to utilize scarce, not only scarce resources and money and talents, but everything can be utilized in an effective manner. That's something we could really learn to improve the status of well-being. So now I'm come very quickly with all the panelists. And what are the key things you think that we need to improve or maintain and improve the well-being, the people, particularly mental side, knowing that many more difficulties are coming? Vicky, you are expert on training people about how to improve their resilience in terms of mental health. Can you just talk about what are the possible things we could do to intervene?
So I think everybody should learn about psychological first aid, just like we learn
First
about
aid, psychological first aid.
right?
Okay.
We just spent all of this energy on locking us down and keeping us safe physically. And we're spending a lot of time and energy thinking about our economic survival and recovery. But as human beings, as we're all just discussing, we are feelers, right? We are thinkers. So our mind, taking care of our mind is really important. We also mentioned that we're going to have more disasters. There is a lot of good work and research out there in psychological first aid. And that is how to take care and prepare yourself and look after vulnerable populations in times of disaster. So we should all know that, just like how we need to know.
It's
like,
readily available already.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. It's been rolled out. We translated it into Japanese and we've rolled it out across the country. And now I think the Japanese government says this is best practice in how to deal with disasters.
So it is kind of a training package, or it is something we can just read? And
It's a training package.
Training
And you
package.
can, yes. In addition to that, you also learning about resilience and helping your people in the workplace or across the community develop resilience. So Angus, you were talking about checking in on your employees' mental wellness, right? But research is saying from Oracle did a study of, I think, 12 countries, 11,000 people, and the employees around the world were saying last year was the most stressful year ever, around 78% of them. And around 80% were also saying, we want our companies to do more. They're not doing enough for us. They didn't know really how to handle all of the challenges and the changes. And if we are going to be adaptable and have resilience, we need to be flexible. And we need to know how to manage those stresses and pressures that are going to be placed upon us. So teaching people about resilience is going to be key. Helping our managers, as you said, they're going to be those first line people, is going to be really critical. Looking after and knowing who are our vulnerable population so we can build up their resilience levels so they don't go into burnout is going to be critical.
So it's like rather than providing the food, you need to teach people how to fish. Sort of
Correct.
how to boost up the ability to be
Correct.
resilient.
A perfect example of that is in a disaster, we have a tendency to want to go in and rescue the person who was just in a disaster. And in that, we make them feel weaker, right? So they have already lost everything. That doesn't mean to say they've lost the ability to cook or do things, but in our desire to rush in and save them, we make them weaker. And that is what psychological first aid says. Don't do that. Go in and ask them, what do you need? Do you want me to help you cook the food? Do you want to cook the food? Do you need food to cook it or equipment to cook it? Help them to do things again, to be resilient, to feel that they can be normal again.
Yeah, by
right?
being actually, they could be a proactive participants.
Correct. Rather than say, I'm going to rescue you, because that disempowers them.
That's very interesting. And this is also well documented also?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Well researched.
How can we access to that?
Psychological first aid is around.
We
There's
can Google
lots
it.
of places.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Tell teachers
we can do it after
we
this.
teach it, right?
Please don't do it right now, but by the way. Well, Angus, we heard about the best practice of what at least you led within the MUFG's global society, but there may be some more things you are thinking about or planning to do to improve. Are there any future plan to boost up the resilience or the strength or the ability of the people to build up their own well-being?
Yeah, of course. So I think it's there's a number of different layers, I would put it. So from an institutional level, as an HR professional, sort of my job is to be the custodian of sustainable well-being in the organization. So, but that my job isn't to is to ensure the well-being of every employee. Obviously, we need the business, the managers, everybody to help. From a leadership perspective, certainly our CEO, the MUFG CEO, Kamazawa-san, has come out with an MUFG way, which actually has some principles around the ikigai concept of your passion or your motivation. And the idea is to give people a renewed purpose in the organization. So you simply put, he's leading it, but he's asking every employee in the organization to come up with their own way linked to MUFG. So for example, what are your beliefs? What is your passion? What are your strengths? What are your development points? And how does that link to your job? And how is that going to empower a better future for MUFG? Going back to the fact we are a commercial organization, but there is a massive move towards the employee and the individual from a leadership perspective saying, what is your way? And I think it goes to the point of not directing every individual to say, we think this is what you should do. It's more about the individual's power and their person, what they want to do.
Purpose is a buzzword, but what you're saying is purpose shouldn't be given 100%. Maybe common purpose as a corporate should be said, but it needs to be interpreted and participated by individual employee so that they could make it on their own to be authentic.
Absolutely. And I think the difficulty for the corporates is if you've got over, globally, we're 140, 150,000. You're basically, if you want to flex to every employee, that's 140 or 50,000 ways or purposes or ways of doing things. And obviously, as an organization, you want to have a combined culture and a way of doing things as a corporate. So there's an interesting, again, developing point around getting the common guidelines and values versus an individual having their own way of exploiting those or developing those so they get their own resilience and purpose. So it's actually that conversation is so important, and that's where the line manager comes in. They're sort of the broker, the bridge between the corporate purpose and the individual, and actually their job obviously becomes more complex, but it's around developing and encouraging individual ways and purpose and getting a strength for MUFG out of that. And that's if we can crack that, which I'm not saying we have, but we're trying to, then we'll have something for both the corporate and the individual.
So instead of going to the dichotomy of corporate purpose versus individual life, how to link it within this pendulum and the personalized way for individual, but in a common way as a commercial organization. It's difficult, but the dual objective should be pursued. That's what you're planning to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is we've talked about, we're bringing in a concept of one-to-one bond coaching, which is bonding.
Yeah, bonding.
We're actually using that word.
Yeah.
So there's actually, it's changing the conversation and role between line manager and sort of master and servant to more about a bond between two people, individuals. One happens to be the manager because you need to organize, but it changes the concept of what is my role and power in the organization as an individual rather than someone doing a job for somewhere else.
Got it. Yeah.
So that's the training, but there's training required. These are not skills that come overnight. So there's work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the key words is obviously individual versus the center, but as Vicky mentioned, we need to help people being trained to boost up their ability. Line managers, each employee, even corporate leaders need to work the new way of doing things so that we could boost up the well-being. Alden, do you have any insights on hearing this story about what the practitioners are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, before that, I'm also curious, Angus, because, given my work in the kind of like the healthcare industry, even managers themselves are feeling burnt out and stressed out. So, in a way, we're kind of like expecting managers to do a lot. So I'm wondering too, in this kind of like bonding coaching program that you have within MUFG, like, are there kind of like, if any, are there kind of like additional considerations for the line managers who might need extra resources for them to kind of like deal with their own kind of like well-being and resilience, and then also for the employees? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. I mean, the burden on the line manager now is so big. They're almost leadership slightly abdicates that away to the line manager, and that role day to day, they're actually carrying the most workload for the organization, both commercially. They're asked to deliver all of the results as well as with their people. So yes, we're providing as much support as we can, but actually it's about the qualities of that line manager. There's a part around selecting the right people to do that job, because there's got to be a level of empathy and a different set of skills around understanding people, not just being very good subject matter expert. So it doesn't quite answer your question, but of course we're putting some support around, but probably not enough.
So maybe I could jump in there. And one of the things that we teach in our trainings is that those line managers, if they can form a group between each other and support each other, then that gives them backup. And if they can talk through with each other about what worked, what didn't work, then that also helps share some skills. So that's another way, sort of making a support group amongst the managers can help build their resilience.
So sharing the difficulties among the same peer group is really helpful. Great. So Matsuyama-san, as I said, I know I'm an amateur understander of Buddhism and of course Zen, but one of the things I learned from you and others, please, is that my mind is a limiter. Actually, my mindset prohibits me of freeing up my well-being because I believe that this is my limit. The way I hear the things, I understand the things, I interpret the things, really limit myself, and sometimes in a negative way. Can you provide some I know it's difficult to say in 3 to 5 minutes, but some key lessons we can take away today that how we can ease our own limits or change our mindset so that we don't have to bind ourselves, like the way you're talking about meditations in class, and then help people to feel the air, listen to all the sound, and understanding what's inside of you. So there are many, let's say, practical lessons which are ingrained during the thousands of years of Zen. Can you provide just a 3-minute version of what we can take away?
So basically, the humans as only animals who realize that we are destined to die, right? So, and then what happened is that we calculate how much time we have, and then there occurs anxieties, right? So humans are destined to have anxieties, and the anxieties comes from the Buddha said that we have 4 sources of sufferings: to live, to die, to get aged, and to have disease. So these are not the sufferings, but what we can say is that so these 4 things things will not go as we wish. So that's why we feel sufferings, right? So we have to realize that so things will not go as we wish. So this is the first step, right? And then I think so as Alden-san said, so by comparing scores of others, it's just there's no well-being. There's just a sense of superiority, right? So the real well-being lies in individuals. So especially so we have no time to listen to our heart and the voice of our heart. So I think that is a very important thing to have to reflect ourselves. So we're living in a very busy and stressful world. So to have the right posture and the right breath and listen to our heart, mind. So this is, I think, is a very important step to realize what is our own well-being for each individuals.
Thank you. And physically, I think physically, after several Zen meditation sessions, I feel the heat. I feel totally different. So it's a mind, that's a body link. Should exist in certain way.
Especially in Japanese, we in Chinese character of the breath, so it can be read as our own mind. 自分の字に心.
So those who understand the kanji, breath is likely divided into own self and mind and heart.
Yes. So the breathing, how can I say, express the state of our mind. So to keep the right breath is very important.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I hope. And we need to find a time to go and do the zazen with help with Daiko-san. Thank you so much. I would like to really open up the floor for the question. I know that maybe many of you have a burning question, but please, let's say, by the way, online audience, we are going to take your questions also. So please write in the chat the column. And for the audience right here, I would like to have your hands up and ask some questions. And to whom you would like to ask a question, I would like to take maybe 2 or 3 of them together. Any questions? And the first one there, and any other? Over there. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. Very good discussion. This is Hiroyoshi Kakuyama speaking. I have a question to the Becky-san. So as for the first two of discussions, very good for the line manager assessment. But on the other hand, you mentioned that for the some people have still like a depressed, like learned helpless situation, like all these segment pointed out. So how could we assess such a kind of depressed subject?
So the question is how we can identify those who are hidden in the group that who are really deeply protected. And can you get the next question? And also we could come back all together.
Thank you very much. My name is Yasuo Naito. I'm from Japan Forward, which is the newly born the new media. I'm running the new English media now, and I'm really happy to join this session because well-being is kind of the most important the theme. So my not question regarding the the hearing of those kind of participants. Thank you very much for your thoughts, the sharing your thoughts, and I was wondering you could share your thoughts through Japan Forward, our media, and this is a kind of great opportunity to provide the well-being from Japan. So if you could kindly provide us more chance to share the world viewers your
Okay,
thoughts.
okay, thank you so much. But you could talk individually after the session, by the way. And so going back to the first question, how we can really identify the missing part of the organization who are really depressed?
Right. So one of the things that we've been doing over the last 20 months or even before then was helping managers, and not just managers, we train embassy staff or schools and educators, is how to identify somebody who might have a mental health problem. Okay. And so we call this, it's mental health first aid training. So helping people to identify and look for the signs of someone who might be struggling, and then how to have a conversation with them and ask them what support do they need, and then how to link them into, maybe you've got an EAP program, maybe you've got a coaching program or other services, asking them what they need. But the first step that you need to know is, what does a mental health problem look like, and how do I recognize those signs? So that's really critical. And I think that's also something that all managers and all teachers, we all need to know.
So developing the identifying ability to all the frontline managers is really important.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts from other participants on that one? How to identify the difficult segments?
Yeah, I think the mental health first aiders is a very interesting concept, and we brought it in across the globe where it's had some very good take up actually. And I think we might see a movement towards that being a sort of 101, meaning a standard set of skills obtained by as people grow in the organization, that it becomes something that they have as a qualification in order to do their job. So I'm massive fan of that.
Okay, so the question that I have this the hands here anymore. Okay, so please.
Hi, I'm working for education in school. Is there any message or advice for well-being of next generation in pandemic and tech society?
Yes, so we've also been working really hard with schools and universities because we know that they've been hit hard. We also knew that before the pandemic, right around the world, but particularly in Japan, youth mental health has been increasing, particularly depression, and through the pandemic, we saw increases in youth suicides. So we know that this is a vulnerable time, and we've been trying to educate people in how to recognize those signs, how to build resilience, and how to link them into supports. So that I think that question of resilience is really important, because I think young people, the next generation, are very confused. I think that they are struggling with thinking about, what does the future look like for us? What does the planet going to look like for us? Do we want to work for companies? Do they care for us? They're looking for that meaning, right? They're questioning it. And that's a good question, because for me, one of the things that I find really encouraging out of all of this pandemic is that we are having discussions about mental health. Beforehand, we were letting those with mental health issues slip under the rug, right? Now it's right front and center, and I think it's key, and particularly young people need to question that.
That is something you can contribute to the Japan Forum for the online, because it's targeted to the younger generation also. And I really would like to ask Dr. Lai, because you're an educator also in the University of New York. How do you feel about that kind of that situation, and any advice for the younger generation to go through the coming difficulties?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Vicky has already kind of like shared great insights in terms of kind of like the how can younger generations reprioritize. But I'm actually because a lot of my work kind of like is advising basically communities and businesses and government stakeholders in terms of what's next, right? And I think, these stakeholders should first of all recognize that, for example, in Japan, by 2024, half of the workforce will be considered millennials. And millennials, they care about sustainability, they care about diversity, they care about meaning and purpose, is what Vicky was talking about. So I think stakeholders should first recognize that this wave is coming. And I think, my call to action is that for them to not be reactive. Like, I think they should jump on the bandwagon to say, look, the new wave is coming. They care about well-being and resilience and mental health. We need to be part of the conversation now to figure out, how do we measure well-being? How do we think about well-being, so that we don't sit there and wait till when, so for example, the Securities Exchange Commission in the US is now requiring all public companies to report human capital data. So right now the measures are still very broad, but I can assure you in 5 to 10 years time, it's going to be more and more specific. And I think this is when companies, communities, stakeholders, institutions, you want to be part of the conversation so that you can shape it and not wait till kind of like later on to be, passively reacting to that. So
that's great. That's great. Becoming a shaper is something we would like to ask you to think about. So I can't help asking Yano-san to make some comments over the discussion, because you have studied quote unquote happiness for years and in an expert on it, and any insights you could share hearing the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for a great discussion, and especially practices, even at Stanford and MUFG and a lot of people. And I think there are a lot of insights I gained this session, but actually I have collected and analyzed a lot of data in the last 15 years, and one big discovery we have found is individually happiness and well-being is quite different and diversified, but from looking at the macroscopic, total well-being or average well-being of a group of people, there is only one factor affecting the well-being. That's the relationship with others. Especially for example, one big predictor is the difference in answering the questionnaire related to happiness. The difference between the answer or the question or index of the questionnaire among two people who are communicating with. So human relationship is a very big, important thing, and that has not been addressed in the last couple of decades, and we need put more emphasis on that. Mental health is of course individual is important, but also the relationships is very, very important. That's what our data shows.
Maybe I could just jump in on that
Yes,
and
please.
say on our crisis line and many lifelines all around the world, loneliness is one of the biggest factors that people are struggling with. So that goes with what you're saying. And one of the things that we saw in the pandemic was that confusion about if we can't see people face to face, how do we have those connections? And we had to develop new ways of those connections, because connections are really important because we're social beings.
It's very important to understand that. I myself has started learning about happiness looking at Yano-san's book years ago of Data no Miyazuru Today, individual hand of the data, which actually analyze in the real world and which organization feels in averages macroscopic basis happiness and also productivity, and as he said, the relationship and the communication level differs both, and which is proven. By the way, so I would strongly suggest you, those who are interested, to asking to Yano-san about his new book also, by the way. Thank you for your precious comments. Any question about it? I think we need to close in a couple of minutes. So I really would like to ask all of you to big applause to the panelists. And I think my personal learning is that we need to have a multi-lenses to look at the well-being. You know, leadership, microscopic, and individualized both. And there are common threads of the relationship. And by the way, the key learning too for me is how to develop the ability in every level of the society to have the well-being resilience at the employee levels, societal member level, line manager level, top manager level. Developing this capability is crucial in going through the coming difficulties of many more pandemics and natural disasters. But with doing that, I think if all of us gathering together, and also including the online audience, thank you so much, to take away a couple of lessons for themselves and actually execute it accordingly for the well-being of our society in the coming days. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.